Welcome to the second part of the Tide BBL scam scandal, call it what you will video, and today I'll be looking at reasons why nobody in government seems interested in putting a stop to that scam and naming some names. Let's start with a quick deep dive on Tide and the bounce back loan scheme and how they were dodgy right from the get-go. Tide were approved by the British Business Bank as a BBL lender, but they had something of a problem. That being, they didn't have much money to lend out compared to the other lenders in the scheme. Also, they couldn't access dirt cheap money from the Bank of England to lend out via the scheme either, which the other big banks all had access to. So they hatched a disgusting plan to try and bag as many people as possible to apply to them for a bounce back loan, and invented their own little waiting list, which they then wanted to use to force the government to give them access to that cheap Bank of England money. But that waiting list created a huge problem for the tens of thousands of business owners on their waiting list, who Tide didn't have the funds to lend them a penny anyway, never mind a £50,000 bounce back loan. What they did was enter the details of business owners on that waiting list onto something called the Shared Industry Database, which other lenders would have to check before they paid out an approved BBL to one of their customers, just to double check to see if their business they were about to pay out a bounce back loan had actually bagged one from another BBL lender. So basically, as soon as somebody approved a bounce back loan, they'd enter it on that database. Bingo, the lenders could check it to see if they've already had one, and if so, you're not having a second one. But by putting those on the waiting list onto that database, when it became obvious to business owners Tide didn't have a pot to piss in and wasn't going to lend them anything anyway, and they were being used as a pawn by Tide versus the government, those business owners, because they were now on that database, couldn't apply anywhere else for a bounce back loan, and lots of them never ended up getting one, all due to Tide. I was badgering everybody about this obvious problem ages ago, and that database was one that the British Business Bank said they didn't have. But then CFAS said, "Oh, do fuck off, we built it for you." As you can see on the screen, they're just a few of the thousands of messages I got at the time. There were tens of thousands, literally, of people on that Tide waiting list. And if another lender discovered somebody had applied, they were classed as a suspected fraudster then. Because, oh, that's Tide have said you've got a bounce back loan here. What the hell are you doing applying to us? And then to add insult to injury, Rishi Sunak stood up in the House of Commons and announced that, all the steps he's taken, blah, 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 have helped stop £2.2 billion worth of bounce back loan fraud. Well, that's utter bollocks, Rishi, my darling. Because that shared industry database mainly had Tide customers listed on it, who you've now classed as a fraudster, because Tide have added the name as having a BBL onto a database when they never got one. And the only way some of them people could convince a second lender that they hadn't got a BBL off Tide was to get a written letter off Tide saying we haven't give you one. And then most lenders would say, no, it's a bit dodgy this, we don't want anything to do with you, you can't have a bounce back loan, even though we were just about to approve it and pay it out to you. But our final check said, oh, you've already got one, you're already highlighted on this industry database. So you didn't stop all this fraud, Rishi, you caused genuine hard-working business owners not to get a fucking bounce back loan, you utter arsehole. And all because of Tide and their dodginess. In fact, if you look at the screen, this was a letter sent from the British Business Bank to the Public Accounts Committee, and they said they've managed to stop 43,958 fraudulent bounce back loans worth £1.59 billion. Well, it's amazing if Tide had about 40,000 bounce back loans added onto the database, and lo and behold, there's 43,000 fraudulent ones. Perhaps somebody who's hard of thinking, you could match the two together and say you probably prevented 43,000 people from getting a bounce back loan who were entitled to it if Tide hadn't been fiddling and diddling and doing the things behind the scenes they were up to. Jesus, how thick are these people? I want to give you some idea of how many bounce back loans Tide actually lent out in the end. It was 1,824. and over 48% of them have already gone into default or are in arrears. For over 48% of them. And do you want me to tell you why that could be the case? Because Tide was so pissed off they couldn't get any more money to lend. They had a big hissy fit. So whilst every other bounce back loan lender across the land was offering everybody the pay-as-you-grow options, whereby they could take interest-only periods, repayment breaks, extend the term of the loan, etc., Tide refused to offer them. So they must have known people were going to default, because the people who were going to take them couldn't take the pay-as-you-grow options, so were pushed into default. And then they can start blagging them extra fees and charges I told you about in part 1 of this video. Can you see how it's all beginning to fit together now, dear viewer? Force people into default, claim on the guarantee, get an extra 10%, thank you very much, in my pocket, don't offer the pay-as-you-grow options. Is the penny dropping, love? Is it? Oh, but it gets worse, dear viewer. It gets worse. Let me tell you about the bank referral scheme. Ho ho ho. Right, so let's tell you about this bank referral scheme. It was some harebrained scheme. It was actually advocated by the Liberal Democrats under Nick Clegg, with the former Liberal Democrat Business Secretary Sir Vince Cable hinting at it in 2014. Now, if you can remember way back then, God, it seems like a million years ago, there was a coalition, wasn't there, between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives? Anyway, it was the Liberal Democrats who were pushing for it. And then it was George Osborne, he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time in August 2014, who instructed the British Business Bank to make it happen. It went live in November 2016. Now, basically, what this scheme is if you apply to one of the big banks for a business loan, including the new recovery loan things, and one of them big banks, Lloyds, Santander, Barclays, HSBC, NatWest, RBS, whoever, if they turn you down, they've got to suggest or offer you to be passed over to the bank referral scheme. Now, what the bank referral scheme is, it's a designated platform. It's like a portal. There's 3 of them: alternative business funding, funding options, and funding exchange. And basically, you go over to these government-approved portals, and you enter all your details, and then in layman's terms, you get hounded then by a load of brokers and high-interest loan scam artists, payday loan type lenders-esque, who will hound you morning, noon and night to see if you want to take out a loan with them. Isn't that a brilliant idea? So, get refused a loan by one of the big banks, a business loan, and they're obliged by this bank referral scheme to pawn you off and throw you at the mercy of high interest rate lenders. And trust me, there's a lot of people have been in touch with me saying, Mike, I applied and now I'm being hounded at all hours of the day by brokers, and some of the interest rates being charged, it'd make your hair curl. Anyway, what's this got to do with Tide? I can hear you ranting in the background. Well, guess who's just bought one of them approved designated platforms, portals, call it what you will. Tide. Now, this is intriguing. So maybe this is why the government doesn't want to do anything to upset Tide, because now the government are forcing all the major lenders in the UK to pawn business owners who can't get traditional funding from a bank for the business. The government is pushing them over to Tide. Can you see? It gets worse, it really does. Now, I've got a video here. This is Alan Mack. He's a Conservative MP, and he was a backbencher at the time. And if you look behind him, you'll see Rishi Sunak sat there. Now, Alan Mack gets up and he's singing the praises of this bank referral scheme. But Watch Rishi's face. It's as if he's getting excited. Who knows? Maybe Mrs. Sunak is going to set up a loan shark firm. Who knows? Like the one Lord Agnew's got. Did I tell you about Lord Agnew? Well, he's a bat. I digress. Oh, it's a long story. I'm not going to go there just yet. But anyway, watch this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Access to capital is vital for small businesses in Havant and across the country, and a refusal from a big bank shouldn't be the end of the line. Will the Minister continue to support the bank referral scheme, which helps so many small businesses access alternative sources of finance?
Blooming heck, I'm running out of time. What else do I need to tell you? There is the... if... the Earl of Lindsey is a Conservative member of the House of Lords. If you're watching this, Petal, as you can see from your screen, the Tide Coroners Financial Hardship Charity. Your accounts are a bit late, love. They need sorting out. If you could sort that out, Earl Lindsey. Another Conservative linked to Tide. Did I ever tell you about that charity? Well... I'm not one to gossip, but because they got rumbled right at the start, you know, them little imaginary waiting lists for money that were never going to come. Well, they set up this charity and they got people to donate, and then they issued, which is very generous of them. Imagine this: they issued I think it was £1,000 to a couple of hundred SMEs who were suffering for. I know, so that's a very nice gesture. But because Tide probably put them in that fucking position in the first place, they're a shower. So there we are, another Conservative member of the House of Lords this time, linked to Tide. I wonder if he gets paid. Anyway, I digress. What there was another thing as well. And another thing, Tide got awarded 25 million. In cold hard cash from the RBS Alternative Remedies package. So somebody thought that was a good idea to give them 25 million. Can you believe this? Do you see how it's all linking together now? And why nobody in government can be asked to feel the collar of Tide, who are scamming, as I said right back in part 1 of this video, SMEs who are in financial distress, many of whom who are vulnerable, and they're hitting them, robbing them, scamming them of them fees. That's outrageous. But there we go. Now, I've not got enough time for the final bit of this video, which I'll have to do in a part 3. God, this could be going on for weeks. You have to get comfy, get some biscuits and a cup of coffee. Right, part 3. I will let you know what we've been doing, secret squirrels behind the scenes, with Labour's COVID Corruption Commissioner team. We got a couple of answers off the government this past few days. They're very late. We got some questions. There's one more question they've got to answer. They're obviously late answering it because it's Kevin Hollinrake. Can you imagine? Did I tell you about the CBILS he got? 3.5 million. I digress. I'll tell you about Kevin Hollinrake another day. Anyway, he's got one more question which we put to the Department of Trade about this scandal, and then I'll go through them and I'll give you a timeline of when we asked and what the reply was. Because it begs the question on the 2 questions they've so far answered, why the fuck are they not doing anything?